I was never the type to believe in ghost stories. After my breakup, I didn't want advice, friends, therapy, or even distractions. I wanted silence, solitude, something to drown out the noise in my own head. So I booked a cheap riverside cabin deep in rural Mexico, far enough from the city, from people, from her. The pictures looked charming. Aged wood, dusty windows, thick trees hugging the edge of a slow-moving river. It felt untouched by time. That's what I needed. The cab driver barely said a word during the ride from the bus station. But when I told him the exact address, his eyes met mine in the rearview mirror for just a second longer than comfortable. "People don't stay there long," he muttered. "Too quiet." His tone made it feel less like a comment and more like a warning. I pretended not to hear him. When we arrived, the place was just like the photos. Rustic, lonely, almost too perfect. An old woman selling tamales near the road gave me a long stare as I unloaded my bags. I tried to smile at her. She didn't smile back. Instead, she whispered something under her breath as I passed. I caught only one phrase. "Ese lugar escucha el llanto." That place hears the crying. I told myself it was just superstition, or maybe she thought I was someone else. Either way, I wasn't about to let a cryptic old woman ruin the peace I'd been craving for months. The first day passed in quiet bliss. I unpacked, walked the woods, sat by the river with a cup of coffee, and let the stillness seep into me. The sun dipped low, and I watched the light melt off the water like gold. That night, the cabin creaked with the usual groans of old wood settling. The wind whispered through the trees. Around midnight, I was dozing off on the couch when I heard it. Software, far away, like someone sobbing. It was faint, almost like the sound was coming from a dream. But as I held my breath, I heard it again. A low, sorrowful weeping, carried on the breeze, floating just outside the window. I stood still, my heart suddenly in my throat. It wasn't an animal. Animals don't cry like that. But it couldn't be a person either. Not here, not at this hour. Not in a place so isolated that I hadn't seen another soul in hours. I walked to the window slowly, peered out into the moonlit yard. Nothing. Just shadows dancing between the trees. I told myself it was probably the wind, or my own brain messing with me. After all, I'd barely slept the night before. I'd been drinking. Maybe I'd even dreamed it. Still, something made me open the front door. The moment I did, the crying stopped. There was no one there. Just the soft hush of the river in the distance, and the cold wind brushing against my skin. I stepped outside, scanning the tree line, waiting for any sign of movement, any sound. Nothing. I should have felt relieved. But instead, I stood in the doorway longer than I needed to, staring into the dark, every hair on my neck standing on end. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined hearing her again. The woman who wept. The second day felt quieter, not peaceful, not like before. Just quiet in a way that made you feel watched. I tried to shake it off. Blamed it on the unfamiliar bed, the strange sounds from the woods, the loneliness clawing at the back of my mind. I took my dog, Rufus, for a walk along the river at sunset, hoping the fading gold light would calm my nerves. The air felt heavier that evening, colder, as if the temperature dropped just by the water's edge. Rufus stopped short about 20 feet from the shore. He growled low, then backed away, tail tucked. No amount of coaxing could get him near the river. I laughed nervously, ruffling his fur. "What's wrong, buddy? You afraid of fish?" But I felt it too. A strange pull in my chest, like a string tugging at my insides, urging me forward and warning me back at the same time. I didn't stay long. That night, I cooked dinner, lit a fire, and tried to lose myself in a book. The cabin groaned again as it settled in the wind, but I could tell when midnight approached. The air changed. Everything became still. Then the crying returned. It started faint, like the night before, but quickly grew louder. Closer. Rufus barked, once, then whimpered and crawled under the bed. I stood frozen, staring at the window. The sound was definitely coming from outside. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the wind. This time I had to know. I stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking under my feet. The moon was high, casting silver light across the rippling river. That's when I saw her. A figure in white stood at the edge of the water, barefoot, motionless. Her hair hung down like wet vines, long and black, dripping into the current. Her head was bowed, her hands hanging at her sides. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, like she had always been there. I blinked, and she vanished, gone, as if she had never been there at all. But the crying didn't stop. It didn't even fade. It got louder, and then I realized it wasn't coming from the river anymore. It was coming from inside the house. I turned so fast I nearly tripped on the stairs, heart hammering in my chest. I rushed back in, calling for Rufus. Nothing. The crying was in the walls, in the floorboards, seeping into my ears like thick fog. I checked every room. Nothing. But then I saw it, just outside the front door. Wet footprints. Small. Bare. Leading from the river to my porch. To my door. And then they stopped. Right where I was standing. By the third day, I'd stopped pretending I wasn't scared. There was no rational explanation for what I was experiencing, and trying to convince myself otherwise only made it worse. The wet footprints still hadn't dried on my porch. Rufus refused to leave my side, and every time we neared the river, he whimpered like a beaten thing. I tried asking around again in town, but no one would look me in the eye. No one except the children. 3 boys sitting near the edge of a crumbling stone wall watched me like I was a ghost. When I passed, one of them whispered, "La Llorona lo busca." Another dared his friend, "Say her name at the river. She comes faster." They laughed, but it didn't reach their eyes. The bravest of them looked at me and said in a low, serious tone, "She cries for her hijos. If she thinks you have them, she never leaves." That was the first time I heard her name, La Llorona, the weeping woman. I'd heard the legend before, in passing, but only as a story meant to scare children into obedience. Now it didn't feel like a story. It felt like my reality. That night, I set up cameras outside, one pointing toward the river, another at the back of the house, and one near the front porch. It was more to calm my nerves than anything else. Maybe if I captured nothing, I could convince myself it was just stress. Maybe if I captured something, I could finally understand what was happening to me. Just after midnight, the crying returned. Louder now, closer. The sound wasn't just a background noise anymore. It was inside me, vibrating in my chest, wrapping around my bones like cold wire. "Mis hijos," the voice moaned. "Donde están mis hijos?" I froze in place. She wasn't just weeping now. She was speaking. Rufus growled once, then ran under the bed and wouldn't come out. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed. What I saw made my stomach drop. On the river cam, the water rippled gently under the moonlight. And then, she appeared. A woman, dressed in white, long black hair, bare feet. She walked across the river, across it, her steps never disturbing the surface. It was like watching a reflection move without a source. Her face was veiled, but even through the grainy footage, I could see her head tilt as if listening, as if searching. Then, without warning, she stopped. She turned her head slowly toward the cabin, toward me. I dropped the phone. The crying intensified. It was no longer outside. It was everywhere. Through the windows, in the floorboards, in my ears. "Mis hijos!" she screamed. "Donde están mis hijos?" I backed up, tripping over the rug. My breath caught in my throat. And then, everything went black. When I woke, I was on the floor, soaked. Water was pooled around me. My clothes were drenched. My lungs burned like I'd been held under too long. I coughed, hard, and spat up water. Dirty, cold river water. But all the doors were locked. All the windows were shut, and I hadn't moved an inch. I scrambled to the camera footage again. The river cam froze just after she looked toward the house. Static. But the porch cam had recorded something else. My front door opening, and nothing walking in. Nothing. Except the sound. That unbearable cry. Mis hijos. ¿Dónde están mis hijos? Now, it wasn't just her voice I feared. It was the possibility that she thought I had the answer. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had changed. Not just fear. Something deeper. Like my body remembered something my mind refused to admit. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, watching my own reflection as if waiting for it to tell me something. My skin was pale. My eyes were red. I hadn't cried, but it looked like I had. I kept thinking about the river, the voice, the footage, and the water in my lungs. That's when I decided to visit the tiny town library. It was little more than a single room tucked into the back of the municipal building. Dust floated in the shafts of light coming through the shuttered windows. I asked the clerk if there were any old newspaper archives. She hesitated, then nodded toward a row of boxes in the corner. Hours passed as I sifted through yellowed pages and crumbling headlines. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. But then, buried in a local paper from 2 decades ago, I found it. Missing. 2 boys vanish, near riverfront cabin. I read the article over and over. It described how a woman reported her sons, aged 6 and 8, missing after a weekend at their family's riverside retreat. The last place they were seen? My cabin. The police searched for weeks. Divers combed the river. Nothing was ever found. No bodies, no belongings. Just one detail stood out. The mother claimed she heard crying near the river at night. But when she went to investigate, her boys were gone. The date matched almost exactly 20 years ago this week. I left the library with shaking hands. Back at the cabin, the air felt wrong, stale, pressurized, the kind of silence that comes just before a scream. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a small bag, grabbed Rufus, and checked into the only motel in town. It was dingy and smelled like mildew, but I didn't care. I needed sleep. Real, uninterrupted sleep. I got none. At precisely 12:17 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of crying. But I wasn't near the cabin anymore. It was in the motel. Through the walls, through the vents, through my own skull. Mis hijos! ¿Dónde están mis hijos? Rufus barked like mad, spinning in circles, trying to claw at the walls. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't help. It was like she was in the room with me. I left before sunrise and drove back to the cabin. As much as I hated it, I felt like it was the only place I might understand what was happening. The road back was quiet. Too quiet. No cars, no birds. Just that suffocating silence again. When I stepped onto the porch, I froze. There, in the middle of the welcome mat, sat a child's toy. A small red truck. Rusted wheels. Mud-caked. I never bought it. I never owned it. I'd never seen it before. But I recognized it. And I had no idea how. That night, the dream started. Dark water. Small hands reaching up from beneath the surface. A voice calling my name, but not the weeping voice. A child's voice. 2, maybe. And then a scream. Piercing. Guttural. A woman shrieking with grief so deep it turned the water black. I woke, gasping for breath, my shirt soaked with sweat. Or maybe river water. I couldn't tell anymore. My memories began shifting in ways that made no sense. I remembered standing on the riverbank with children, but I didn't know who they were. I remembered a woman yelling my name, but I couldn't see her face. And I remembered walking away, always walking away. The weeping never stopped that night, and somehow, it sounded closer. I don't remember falling asleep that night. One moment I was staring at the ceiling, heart pounding from the nightmare, the children's hands clawing at me from beneath the river's surface. And the next, I was waking up on the floor again. No memory of moving. No idea how long I'd been out. The toy truck was still on the porch, now soaked from dew, its red paint chipped and flaking like it had been there for years. Everything was quieter than usual. The weeping hadn't come back since I returned from the motel, but the silence was almost worse, like she was waiting for something, or watching. Rufus still refused to go near the river. He barely left the bedroom. He sat in the corner, head low, trembling even in his sleep. I fed him from my hand because he wouldn't eat from the bowl. I started talking to him more, not because I expected him to answer, but because his silence felt less haunting than the cabin's. I didn't leave the house much that day, but around sunset, something pulled me to the river. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Desperation, more likely. I stood on the edge, my shoes sinking slightly into the muddy bank. The current moved slowly, hypnotically, like it was breathing. That's when I heard it. A voice. Not the weeping I'd come to expect. Not the bone-deep sobbing or the tortured wail of mis hijos. This was something else. A whisper. My name. It came from the water. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. But the voice followed. It wasn't loud. It was gentle, familiar. Come back. I ran. I didn't look behind me. I didn't stop until I was inside the cabin with the door locked and every window shuttered. I sat on the floor, breath ragged, watching the cracks under the door like something might seep in through them. Later that night, I visited the town again. I needed answers. Anything to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But the few people who would even speak to me now just gave half smiles or nervous glances. The children had stopped playing near the road. The tamale woman wouldn't meet my eyes. Only the old woman, the same one who'd warned me my first day, spoke up. You shouldn't be here anymore, she said, not unkindly. She thinks you're him. The father. What do you mean, the father? I asked. My voice cracked. I could barely get the words out. She sees you and remembers him. The one who left. The one who walked away while she screamed. Her eyes narrowed. You look just like him. Back at the cabin, I couldn't sleep. I started pacing, opening drawers, searching for anything that might explain who the previous tenant was. But it was still empty, still lifeless. Then Rufus started scratching at the floor. He was pawing at a corner of the living room rug, whining, digging. I pulled the rug back and saw a wooden panel, loosely nailed. A crawl space. I pried it open. The air that came out was cold, wet, stale. I reached inside with a flashlight and found something soft. Paper. A bundle. I pulled it out. Children's drawings. At first, they were innocent. Trees. A river. A house that looked like mine. Then, it got darker. One drawing showed a woman in white, her hair covering her face, her arms stretched out as if reaching for someone. The next showed two boys standing on the riverbank, and a man behind them. A man drawn in black crayon, with sharp eyes, and no face. The last drawing made me sit down on the floor, trembling. It was the same man, standing next to the woman in white. Her mouth was open in a scream. The children were underwater. I looked closer at the man. Dark clothes, short hair, my eyes, my face. It was me. And I didn't know how that was possible. The storm came suddenly, like the sky itself had been holding its breath and finally let go. By late afternoon, the clouds rolled in thick and black, swallowing the sun and turning the river an angry gray. The wind howled through the trees like it carried voices, and the rain fell in sheets, drowning the world one drop at a time. Power lines cracked, the lights flickered and went out. I was trapped. The roads flooded in under an hour. I checked the radio, but all I got was static. My phone lost signal. No internet. No neighbors in sight. Just the endless pounding of water against the roof and windows, and Rufus trembling beneath the bed, growling at shadows that hadn't moved. The floorboards groaned under the weight of something I couldn't see. The crying hadn't started yet, but I could feel it building. Somewhere just outside the walls, swelling with the river, waiting to break. By midnight, it did. The weeping didn't creep in like before. It didn't start soft or subtle. It roared. A cry so loud it rattled the windows, shook the walls, made the floor quake. I backed into a corner, clutching a flashlight, praying it would pass. But this time, she wasn't outside. She was inside. She didn't knock. She didn't creep. She appeared. One moment, the room was empty. The next, she stood there, dripping wet. Her dress clinging to her, torn and filthy. Her veil soaked and dragging behind her on the wood like seaweed. Her feet hovered inches above the floor, water pouring from her sleeves, her hair a curtain of black strands over her face. The crying stopped, and then she screamed, "Mis hijos, you took them!" Her voice wasn't just loud, it tore through me like shattered glass. My ears rang. My vision went white, then black. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke, everything was ruined. The cabin looked like it had drowned. Water covered the floor. The furniture floated, broken and bloated. Mud smeared the walls. The windows had shattered inward like something exploded inside. The air stank of rot and decay. And Rufus was gone. I screamed for him. I called his name until my voice cracked, but the only response was silence. Then I saw something floating in the water, half submerged, tucked under the table leg. A photograph. It was warped and faded, edges curling from moisture, but the image was still clear enough. It showed me, standing by the river, with two boys. One sat on my shoulders, grinning. The other held my hand. I stared at it for minutes before I realized my hands were shaking. I didn't remember taking that photo. I didn't recognize the boys. And yet, something in me did. Something deep, just below the surface of memory, stirred, like a dam about to break. The rain outside kept falling. The river kept rising, and my mind began slipping. Flashes came. Two children laughing, running barefoot through the tall grass by the river. A woman calling to me, pleading, water up to my waist, screaming, so much screaming. And then, nothing. Black. Gone. Had I been here before? Years ago? Had I forgotten? Or had I chosen to forget? I stared down at the photo in my hand. My own smile looked hollow, empty. The children's eyes stared back at me, as if they knew. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry. I sat in the dark, holding the picture, listening to the sound of water rushing all around me, wondering if it would take me next. And somewhere outside, beneath the storm's howl, I heard her again, whispering, closer than ever. "You left them." The morning after the flood, everything was still. Not peaceful, hollow. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, as if the storm had left something behind. The cabin reeked of mildew and river rot. Furniture was overturned, the wood warped with water. My dog, Rufus, was gone. His leash still hung on the wall. His bowl was full. It was like he'd never been here. I sat in the wreckage holding the photo she'd left me. The one with the two boys. The one where I smiled like a father and held a hand I didn't remember grabbing. I stared at it until the sun moved across the sky and shadows stretched like claws across the floor. I needed answers. Not guesses, not dreams, not drawings or whispers. Truth. I went back into town. This time, I didn't ask questions. I pleaded. I stood in front of the old tamale woman's stall, shaking, holding out the photo. "Please," I said. "Please. Who are they? Why do I remember them but don't?" She didn't speak at first. Then, without looking up, she said, "You were here before." I froze. Years ago, maybe more than 20, with a woman and two little boys. I remember you because the older one kept dropping rocks in my bucket. My throat tightened. What happened? She looked me dead in the eyes, and for once, I saw no fear in hers, just sorrow. "You left." I don't remember walking back to the cabin. I barely remember breathing, but I do remember standing at the edge of the river that night, holding the photograph tight, waiting. The sky was cloudless. The water shimmered with moonlight. I whispered, "I need to remember." And the river answered. She rose from the water like it was pulling her from another world. A figure in white, hair soaked and matted to her face. Her veil trailed behind her like sea foam. Her arms trembled as she stretched them toward me. I didn't run. She opened her mouth, and the cry that escaped shook the trees. But this time, it wasn't just weeping. It was words. Mis hijos. ¿Dónde están mis hijos? Behind her, the water shimmered again, and the boys stepped out. Two small shapes, barefoot, dripping, silent. They looked up at me with eyes I should have known. The taller one tilted his head and asked, "Why did you let her take us?" The smaller one said nothing, just held the woman's hand. The truth slammed into me like the current of a river. I had been here, years ago, not alone, with a woman, a family. We had fought, angry words by the river. I'd left in rage. I don't remember where I went. The memory splinters. But when I returned, they were gone. No bodies, no witnesses, no names. I never told anyone. I buried the memory so deep I became someone else. The crying wasn't just grief, it was blame. La Llorona wasn't calling out for any lost child. She was calling out for mine. And she thought I was the man who left her screaming on the shore. Because I was. She didn't attack. She didn't lunge. She just stared. Eyes like bottomless wells, a pain so deep it made the air ache. Then, the river surged. Water rose like hands, pulling at my legs. I tried to move, but the current wrapped around me like chains. I fell, breath stolen, photos slipping from my fingers, sinking into the mud. I didn't fight her. I fought the memory. And in that moment of drowning, I remembered everything. Their names, their laughter, her scream, the way I turned away, and the silence that followed. The river pulled me under, and the world went black. They say no one has lived in that cabin for decades. The town avoids it. Children dare each other to run past the porch at night, but few ever do. Sometimes, just after midnight, if you walk by the river, you'll hear weeping. But not hers. His. A man's voice calling out in the dark, broken and lost. "Where are my children?"